Hello, welcome to the unit on small group discussion. Today we're going to be learning what we need to know in order to have and participate in a small group discussion before class. We're going to begin today by opening our textbooks. Chapter 17 on small group discussion, that's page 449 in the textbook. First thing that we want to do is read the first paragraph under what is a group discussion on page 449. So would someone please volunteer to read that for us? Okay, from this first paragraph, what we learn is that a group discussion has several things in common. And we want to be sure and get this into our notebooks. So please have your notebooks out and be taking this down. A group discussion is first of all goal-oriented. We don't just come to talk or chat. We have a purpose, a reason for being there, something that we're trying to accomplish, and the meeting is over, the discussion is over when we have accomplished whatever that goal was. The second thing that a small group discussion is face-to-face. Now, through the use of technology now, we can have a face-to-face discussion via the internet, but a phone conference call does not constitute a small group discussion. It has to be face-to-face in order to meet the qualifications for a small group discussion. The next thing that we find out about a small group discussion is that it is a small number of people. And we'll read in the second paragraph, it's usually 5 to 7. But it is a small number of people. So if you're in a meeting that has about 20 people in it, that's a meeting. It's not a small group discussion. Now the larger group may take 5 or 6 people, send them out from the main group, ask them to complete a goal in their own separate meeting. That would then be a small group discussion with those other people. And they would bring whatever goal they had achieved back to the larger group. The last thing that we see for a small group discussion is it is purpose driven. It has a purpose. We'll learn what some of those purposes are in the next few pages of our textbook, but just make sure that in your notebooks you have all of these things down, that it is goal oriented, face to face, small number of people, and purpose driven. Now, would someone be willing to read the second paragraph for us? Okay. In the second paragraph is where we hear 5 to 7, and we hear that we choose an odd number of people for our small group discussion because whenever it's time to vote or make a decision, we don't want an even number of people to cause a tie vote. This will avoid any deadlocks. Doesn't have to be that way, just a good idea for it to be there. We also see that there are some things that we need to know in order for us to be able to have a small group discussion. So on a separate sheet of paper in your notebook, a piece of paper that you'll be able to pull out later if necessary, but don't pull it out now, just on a separate sheet of paper, I want you to start a list of the things that you're going to need to know in order to complete your small group discussion. The first thing that we have is who. Now, if you've already become part of a small group, then you know that who that is, and you can put the names of the people in your group. If your group assignment hasn't been completed yet, or you don't know if your group assignment has been completed, you need to check that out in class and then add those names in there as they are assigned. Next comes where. Okay, and where, in this case, for everyone, is classroom. Where is classroom? Next one. Next one is when. And again, if your small group discussion has been assigned, then you should know the when and you should be able to put it in there. If you don't know the when and you think that it hasn't been decided, you can wait for that. But if you think you missed it, then you need to check again in your classroom and find out when your small group discussion is going to take place in class. Okay, those things being said, the next thing that we see from the second paragraph is that this group will be seated in a semicircle with the class listening but not participating in your group discussion, just watching you have your group discussion. All right, turning on to page 450. Would someone please read that first paragraph there at the top of 450, planning a group discussion? From this paragraph, we see that there are some more things that a group discussion will need to accomplish and need to know up front in order to reach their goal and accomplish their purpose. So, in addition to when, topic. Again, this has probably already been assigned in class, but if you're not sure, or if it hasn't been assigned, you need to check out in class and get this information there. Next comes purpose. Okay, and we're going to discuss that right away in order to find out the kinds of purposes that we can choose. After that comes format. We'll be learning these in the next few pages. So right now, let's just find out what we might choose from as purposes and as format. So would someone please read under determining a purpose and a format on page 450. After reading that paragraph, we see a small chart there that says purposes for discussion. If you're in class completing this assignment, what I would like for you to do is divide into smaller groups, and each of the groups take two or three of these purposes and define them for yourself. If you're completing this outside of class, then you need to take every one of these and just in your notebooks, kind of write down, if I were going to solve a problem, how would I know when that was done in my group discussion? What would that look like for me to solve a problem? Brainstorm. What does that look like when we complete that in a group discussion? And for each one of these, just write your own definition of what you think that's going to look like. And then share in your class with other people and see if they arrived at the same decision as you. Okay, having completed that assignment, let's move on to page 451 and find out about format. To be successful, your discussion group needs more than a purpose or reason for meeting. You must also choose an appropriate discussion format. Group discussion formats may be either public or private. We're going to see all of the formats that we can choose from, and we're going to try to determine which ones we might use and which ones are kind of outside of what we're probably going to be able to do. So first we're going to look at the three kinds of public discussion formats. Would someone please read a panel format? As we can read, a panel format is a group of experts giving out their information from their expert opinion. What are the chances we're going to be able to be experts giving our expert opinion? Not very high, right? So we can eliminate that as a possibility for a format for us, but please write it down in your notebooks and make sure you know what a panel format looks like. Next, would someone please read about a symposium format? From the symposium format, we read that this is people bringing speeches. They've done some research, they put together speech, each one gives their speech and shares information and then has a discussion. Of course, we can all do this, so this is a possibility for a format. Symposium is a possibility for a format for us to choose. Okay, going on, someone please read about a forum format. A forum format is either panel or symposium with questions and answers from the audience. Now, All of the group discussions that we are going to take place in class will have the opportunity at the end of 30 minutes to be opened up to questions and answers, feedback from the remainder of the class. So this one we don't really choose because they're all going to wind up being like this one. So let's just leave symposium as the only one of public format that we can choose from for our own individual group discussion formats. Let's move on then to page 452. And on 452, we learn about private discussion formats. Could someone please read about free-form format? Okay, free-form is everyone just discussing. Could we do that? Absolutely we could. So there's another opportunity. Another format that we could choose from as a group. Someone now please read about moderated free-form format. Moderated free-form, could we do that? Absolutely we could. Okay, so far we have 3 things that we can choose as a potential format. Now, standing committee format is the next one, and I'm not really sure why it's listed under private discussion format, because it doesn't really talk about how we run a discussion. It talks about the kinds of committees that is involved in the discussion, and that is a standing committee. Most organizations have standing committees. A lot of them have to do with budgets and finance, raising money, things like that. And these groups run all the time. They're always discussing those issues and keeping track of them for the larger group. And that's what a standing committee is. Not really a format, and it certainly doesn't apply to us. So moving on, what shall we look at next? An ad hoc committee format. Well, technically you're all ad hoc committees. You've been thrown together to just attain this one purpose, this one topic. And that means that if you were in a larger group, they might say, hey, we need someone to research and take care of just this one thing related to our larger purposes. And they would ask people to be on that committee. Once they had accomplished that one thing that they were asked to do, then they would move on and do something else. So not really a format that we're going to be able to use. However, when we go on to roundtable, we can see that that might be a possibility. Would someone read about roundtable, please? Okay, a roundtable, everyone contributing, we could use that. That would be another kind of format that we could do. And then the last format is called progressive format. Could someone read about that, please? Okay, so a progressive format is where we have a larger group and we divide them out into a bunch of smaller groups. You're already the small group, so we can't use that. So when we look at what kind of format, you're going to choose from symposium, freeform, moderated freeform, or roundtable as your choice of format. Okay, in our book, we then go on to topic. Again, you already know your topic. It's already been chosen for you. I have given you that. So let's move on from these to some of the other things that we now need to look at as we continue making plans for our small group discussion. Okay, the next thing that we're going to look at and have to include are definitions. And we know from persuasive speaking that definitions aren't just words that maybe we don't know, and they might be words we don't know, but it also includes words that we need your particular perspective on, what you think. And when it comes to a small group discussion where we're trying to solve a problem and talk about a problem, your group may look at the problem and say, we can't discuss that well in 30 minutes. Let's just look at this one aspect of the problem that we're going to discuss and cover and try to come up with some answer for in the 30 minutes that you're being given for your small group discussion. So definition includes that, defining the areas of your 30-minute discussion that you want to cover for the class. Okay. After we have definitions, the next thing that we want to look at are leadership styles. And for that, we're going to go to page 459. And let's write that up here. Leadership. And on page 459, we again have another chart. This chart is telling us that there are 3 kinds of leadership style that we can use. The first one is called laissez-faire. It is a French term. Laissez-faire leadership means that the responsibilities are shared by all members of the group. Basically, you take that free-form format and you don't put anyone in charge. Everyone is equally responsible for contributing, equally responsible for helping get the goal accomplished. If you are a group and you can look around and you can say, yeah, we all know how to contribute, we would all contribute evenly, laissez-faire might be the right format for you. However, if there's someone in your group who you know tends to be quiet, tends not to be as engaged as everyone else, probably you don't want to use this format. You want to make sure that there's someone to draw that person who tends to be quiet into the whole conversation, because your grade depends upon everyone contributing well. So the next style that we have here in our chart on page 459 is authoritarian leadership. And here the responsibilities are given to one leader. And in this authoritarian model, no one speaks without permission from the authority. Now, in the real world, an authoritarian model would probably be used in a business setting where the boss is in charge of the small group discussion and the boss calls on whomever he or she wants to, and then the boss helps probably makes the decision all by himself or herself. You can use an authoritarian model. Just make sure that if you have an authoritarian model, no one speaks without the permission of the leader. And again, if you have a lot of quiet people in your group, this one might be the one for you, to have someone who's making sure everyone contributes equally and calls on people to make sure that that happens. The last one, the last leadership style that we have is democratic. Democratic, the leader suggests procedures, asks what other members think, but gives a lot of leeway for people to contribute as well as they can. You still have a leader. You still have someone who's in charge. They're just sharing that with everyone else. But you do have someone who's in charge to make sure that those quieter members, those members that usually don't contribute unless someone invites them to, are being invited and are contributing. So those are your 3 leadership styles from which you will choose for your group. Okay, moving on, let's find out what the role of the leader and a secretary as well as participants are. So moving on to page 460. I'm sorry, that's the wrong page. We are moving on to page 462. That's the page that talks about the secretary and the recorder. The leadership on page 459 is the ability to guide a group toward its goal. When a person is appointed leader, he or she may adopt one of the following styles. So a leader is leading us toward the goal. They're introducing the discussion, and they keep the discussion moving on, as well as moderating the discussion. When people start to have maybe disagreements, they'll intercede there, intervene there, come in between the two of those people and say, okay, I think we need to go back and maybe redefine some words. I think you're actually saying the same thing, just in different words. Let's see if we can come to an agreement. Let's see if we can find the middle ground where we all can agree. Also, it is the leader's job to keep the discussion on track. And what that means is that when people start going off on really important things that they want to talk about, because I'm sure no one in these small group discussions is going to have discussions about things that don't relate to the topic, but maybe what they're talking about isn't on the agenda for today. It goes again to that you've defined your topic to just relate to this, so don't have a discussion that affects things out here. And the leader would make sure we stay on that smaller topic and keep engaged that way. Also, the leader is the one who looks around and says, okay, based on what I see, what I hear, what I know, we can be sure that this discussion is at an end. I think we have accomplished our purposes. Make sure that everyone has said everything that they wanted to say, doesn't end the meeting in advance, or might also say, well, based on the time, we need to wrap this up, and here's where we are, and kind of summarize things for people. That would be the leader's job. Okay, going on to page 462, we see that we can also have another role, and again, this is up to your group to decide whether you're going to do this or not, and that is have a secretary. Someone who takes minutes, someone who takes notes. If you have a secretary, the secretary must turn in his or her minutes from your discussion in front of the class, and that is part of that person's grade. So if it's someone who's going to take minutes, make sure it's someone that you know will take good minutes. Taking minutes isn't writing down every single thing that someone says. Taking minutes isn't also just being very sketchy. You need to make sure that we know who said the main things. If there were ideas that were brought forward, were they followed through completely? And the secretary can help the leader keep that discussion on task. You know, we were actually talking about this thing up here and we never really finished that. And a secretary can be a good support for a leader to keep that discussion going in the way that it should. Now everyone else who isn't the leader or isn't the secretary, and again, you don't have to have either of those, your group decides if you're going to have a leader, and your group decides if you're going to have a secretary. But everyone else who isn't doing those two roles, you are a participant in the discussion. What does that mean? Well, that means that you are responsible for helping everyone else stay involved in the discussion, and also responsible for making sure that you stay on task, just like the leader and the secretary are doing. If everyone is working toward that goal, then you don't have anything to worry about. You will reach the goal. So you're helping to define the topic, you're helping to analyze the problem, you're helping to evaluate the facts that have been gathered, sorting through your own notes, no reason why you can't take notes. You're identifying any incomplete information, things that we still maybe next meeting, you won't have a next meeting, but you could find that there are things that you would want in a follow-up meeting in order for you to really accomplish your task. And then you might be considering different solutions. It's your job also to keep an open mind, to not just be trying to bully your way through and get your way in whatever the discussion is, but to keep an open mind for everyone else as well. You are taking an active part. Your grade depends upon you being engaged in the discussion. Sitting there and adding only a couple of things will harm your grade. You need to be involved in the discussion. You need to find ways to engage with everyone else in the group to try to accomplish your goal. You are listening carefully. You don't want to say something that someone said 5 minutes ago because you weren't listening. You have to stay involved for the whole 30 minutes. And remember those critical listening skills that we discussed in chapter 4? Well, they're coming back. It's time to engage those. Be judging what people are saying. Does it have value? If it doesn't have value, why doesn't it? Maybe just part of it has value. Maybe you know something someone else doesn't and you need to chime in. One of the examples that I like to use for small group discussion is maybe I say, hey, you know, we should have that meeting in one of those empty buildings downtown. And you think that's not a very good idea because it's wintertime, and how do we know that there's electric? And certainly how do we know that there's heat? Or there are chairs? But when I say to you, well, I know someone who has a building and I know that they keep heat on and I know that there's electric on and I know where we can get the chairs, that makes all of that go away. But you still need to ask those questions of me and not just assume I've taken care of all of that. You need to be making sure that when I make a suggestion, there's a reason why I made that suggestion and know what it was I was suggesting, and that I've already maybe come over those hurdles that have to be come over in order for this to be successful. But by the same token, You may say, that's a great idea because I know someone who owns a building and you know all of that information. And so in a group discussion, we all bring as much information as we possibly can in order to keep the discussion moving along well. Next, on page 465, we see that it's important for all members to respect all the other group members. We don't call each other names. We don't call each other stupid or say ideas are stupid. We try to be tactful. You remember that from that last chapter? We're trying to be tactful and we stay engaged in a respectful way with one another. We also use an appropriate speaking voice. Volume in this case is gauged on, first of all, that everyone in your group can hear you, and then second of all, that everyone in the class can hear you as well. We're all listening. We want to be able to hear you. So you keep an appropriate volume at all times without yelling in your group member's face, because that, of course, would be rude. Okay. Last thing we want to cover in this chapter is on page 466, what happens when conflict arises? We're not all the same people, and we sometimes disagree. So what happens when there is a conflict, which is a form of disagreement? Get that in your notes. Conflict is a form of disagreement. Well, first of all, we have to realize if it is a conflict or not. So we're recognizing when people are disagreeing. Sometimes people think they're disagreeing and they're really not. They are basically on the same side. In a meeting recently that I was in, we were around a family table and I was at one end and another person in the group was at the other end. And it was kind of interesting because the people that were around the table thought that we were having a large disagreement. And the fact of the matter is that when it was over, someone said, well, I'm glad we resolved that. I said, well, we didn't really have anything to resolve. When we finally realized we were saying the same thing, it went away. And I looked at the other person, I said, didn't it? And he said, yeah. We just had different words that we were using that sounded like we were in conflict. And when we were more specific about those words, we found out that we had the same definitions and we were agreeing to the same things. And there never had been a conflict. There was just a misunderstanding in terms of what words we were using. And so recognizing that can help a lot in terms of getting people past conflicts. They're really not in conflict. They really do agree, have the exact same values, exact same ideas. They're just using different words that seem at odds with each other. But what happens when people really disagree? So, excuse me. On page, page 467, we have another chart, managing group conflict. If you are the leader of your group, you want to pay very close attention to this. If you're using laissez-faire and you're all responsible for leadership, everyone needs to pay attention to this chart. Look at the problem, look at the cause, and look at the possible solutions. Pay attention to that, spend some time on that chart together as a group, either in your small group time or during your library time, and make sure that you're all aware of how to take care of that. Last thing is on page 468, reaching a decision. Now, not everything has a decision. Depending upon what purpose you choose, you may not have to come to a decision. But if you're going to choose a plan, if you're going to solve a problem, if you're going to negotiate past conflict and find a compromise, at some point you're going to have to all come to a decision and say that that's true. So, how do we reach a decision? There are 3 forms of decision that we can make, and you need to decide in advance which one you're going to use. The first one is decree. If you have an authoritarian leadership model, this is the one that you will use, because a decree is made by the leader after hearing all the evidence, all of the discussion. This is what I choose. The next one is voting. That's why we have an odd number of people. Everyone has one vote. Everyone gets to vote. Everyone has to vote. You either are for it, you are against it, or you abstain. A-B-S-T-A-I-N. You abstain, and that means I do not vote yes or no. Maybe you still have some questions. If you have an abstention in your group, you need to find out why that person abstained and make sure that you can overcome that and try to get them to vote one way or the other. So, the majority rules. Only takes one person more than the other side for you to move on. That being said, you might want to try to discuss and see if there are any compromises you could make on the decision that would bring more than just one person, a one-person majority, and make more people feel good about whatever decision you came to. But ultimately, the majority wins, and the rest of us do whatever we can to make sure that that majority decision is successful. The last thing that we have is consensus. And because it is a small group, this is one that probably happens more often than people actually vote. And that is that everyone nods their head and agrees and says yes, 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 without a formal vote. The key to consensus is to make sure that you have checked with every single member of your group and know for sure if they are yes or no. It's very easy for the more quiet members of the group to get railroaded by a consensus. The three loudest members or the two loudest members of the group say, yes, we're going ahead, and they don't even realize that most of the group did not agree with them. They just were quiet. So make sure if you use consensus as your way of coming to a decision, you are checking in with every single member of your group to make sure that every single member agrees or disagrees. It's why the voting is actually a little bit better even in a small group. But when it's obvious that everyone does agree, that's good. Also, make sure that you know that people nod their heads all the time does not mean they agree. Sometimes they very much disagree. I had that happen to me when we lived in Greece. I was having a conversation with a colleague, and she nodded her head, and when we left the meeting, I thought she had agreed with me, and then she went ahead and did the exact opposite of what I thought we had agreed to. And someone said to me, that's how she is. She nods her head, but she's definitely still holding on to her opinion. So people do that, and check in and make sure that this actually means I agree, and not just I hear you, I hear you, I hear you, I hear you, but I still disagree with you. Okay. Any questions? Any questions about any of that? Okay. Then let's move on to how you run the discussion. Okay? When it is time for you to run the discussion, first thing you want to do is share this information with us. Who's in your group? And what is the topic that you're discussing? What's the purpose that you have chosen? What format are you going to be using? Any definitions you have, leadership style, and then, of course, it's not up here, but decision. How have you chosen either the decree or the voting or the consensus? That's how you're going to come to your decision. Let us know that when you're starting. So the first thing you will do is introduce the topic. Then you give us an overview of what you intend to accomplish. You will notice we skipped over in the chapter the whole point about outlining, but you should pay attention to that. You should go back and you should reread that information about outlining. You should have not necessarily an outline, but certainly an agenda is what we more often than not call it for a meeting or a discussion. And that is, we need to talk about these things. We're going to talk about this first and then this. And even with 30 minutes, know about how much time you're going to spend on each thing. If you get done ahead of time, that's great. But you don't want to take too much overtime or you're going to run out of time and not get to the conclusion you hope to reach. And that will affect your grade. So make sure that you discuss what you're going to discuss. That's what the small group meetings are for. That's what the days in the library are for you to come up with that agenda and what you're going to discuss. Be very, very, very careful, because it's so easy to not discuss what you're going to discuss, but just start having your discussion. And if you come to conclusions in advance of the discussion in the class, you won't have anything to discuss in the class. And again, your grade is going to suffer because of that. I can't grade you on what I didn't hear. Mrs. Ontiveros can't grade you on what she didn't hear go on. So when you meet, You're discussing what you're going to discuss. You're making assignments. You go research this, you go research that. You may be setting up appointments in advance with people that you want to talk to. And during library day, that's a good time for you to schedule appointments if you can. That could be phone appointments. You're going to interview someone on the phone. That might be appointments in someone's office or someone's room, but you do not have permission to just go ask people. You need to have scheduled appointments and have a time when you are supposed to meet with a principal, with the lunch ladies, with a member of the board, with someone at the district office. You should have that scheduled. And then you should make arrangements to be there in advance of the time that the meeting is. And you all go, or the people who've been assigned to go and take really good notes, either on the phone or in person, of those conversations to bring back to the rest of the group. So, you introduce the topic, you give an overview of what you intend to accomplish in the discussion, you give any definitions, you give any background information that we may need, things that you've already discussed in advance, because sometimes you do need to have a little discussion in advance in order to accomplish your purpose in the 30 minutes you're given to do that in front of us. So make sure that you do that. Have your discussion, achieve your purpose, make sure everyone is participating, solicit participation from the quieter members, and give everyone an equal chance to speak. Then summarize the points, and as a group, come to your decision, an agreement, your vote, whatever it is you decide to do. That's how your discussion should run. It is 30 minutes. Do you have to use the whole 30 minutes? You do not. However, 5 would be detrimental to your grade. 10 is kind of detrimental to your grade. So try to have a discussion that is at least 15 minutes in length. Otherwise, you had your discussion outside of class, and again, can't give you a grade for that. Make sure that you use your time well. Okay, rules for making a discussion work well. Number 1, don't stifle others through negativity. Well, I don't like that. Well, that's just stupid. That'll never work. Those kind of comments just tell people to sit quietly and say nothing. And it affects all of your grades if they do. So don't stifle that, people. Instead, encourage them. Wow, I hadn't thought of that before. Let's take some time and actually think about that. Because in my mind, that doesn't necessarily work. But you explain what you mean, and maybe I can see it your way. That's how we give way to other people. Don't lose your temper or be verbally abusive. That will definitely go bad with your grade. Don't use personal remarks or attacks. Show respect at all times. Use an appropriate tone. We know tone is paralanguage, right? And paralanguage can say, I just think you're the stupidest thing on earth, even if we didn't actually say that. So make sure our tone is also encouraging and inviting and welcomes people into the discussion. Have good appropriate volume, we talked about that, and enunciate. Use those nice crisp consonants, because we all have to hear and understand. Even though you're in a semicircle and the discussion is with people not very far away from you, the rest of us also have to hear and understand what you're talking about. So make sure you enunciate well. We talked about managing conflict, and please spend some time as a group looking over that chart that is in the textbook. We talked about how to reach a decision, and we've also talked about a false consensus, where it seems like everyone is agreeing, but they're just really nodding their heads, or they're just being quiet because they absolutely do not agree with us. You need to have that clear understanding that everyone agrees, and compromise. Where it doesn't seem like really there's an overwhelming majority, try to find a compromise to get more people on board. Because usually the small group is going to have to take it to a larger group, and the more people in that small group who are in favor of what you're suggesting, the more likely it is that the larger group will go the way that you hope that it will go. Okay? Small group discussions. Going to go over the grading rubric, and it's very simple. It's 15 points. Now, it is 15 points multiplied by 4. Do the math. So missing even 1 point is like missing 4 points. You don't want to do that. Up to 5 points for your participation and role in the group. That means if you're the leader, I grade you on how good of a leader you were. If you're the secretary, I grade you on how good of a secretary you were. If you're a participant, how well did you participate? You get up to 5 points for that. You get 5 points for your individual attention to good speaking techniques. Did you make eye contact with others in your group? Don't have to make eye contact with the teacher or with the class that's just listening, but you should be able to make really good eye contact with everyone in your group. Did you have appropriate volume? Did you use good communication skills? And did you enunciate? 5 points for good speaking skills. The last 5 points are a group grade, and everyone gets the exact same score on this. This is based on how you as a group did. Did you achieve the purpose that you stated? Maybe you achieved another purpose, but did you achieve the one that you stated? Did you use the format that you chose? You maybe used some other format really well, but it wasn't the one you chose. Make sure that you're doing that. Did you bring good definitions? And did you define everything that you should have? And then did you keep progressing from the beginning of the discussion to the designated end, whatever it was that you said you were going to achieve as a purpose? That's how you get your 15 points. If there are any questions, please direct them to Mrs. Ontiveros, or you may email me, and I'll be glad to discuss it with you further. Now, get busy.